Which NFL teams are the most talented entering 2024? What's going on, football fans? It's Mitch here, ranking every single NFL roster entering the 2024 NFL season. Now that the NFL season is almost here, it's time to deep dive into every single starting lineup on all 32 NFL teams, let you know their strengths, their weaknesses, which rosters are underrated, which rosters are overrated, which units are dominant, who features a ton of elite players, and which teams will struggle without any elite players. In this video, this is a ranking from the worst to the best of every NFL roster, not teams. How I actually calculate the strongest rosters in the NFL is by using every starter, placing them in a category from bum or a weak starter to elite starter. And I categorize each and every starting lineup on offense and defense, ranking and calculating all 22 starters together, giving me a grade. And I don't put any bias into the grade itself. I take the number and I rank the team in this video. So based on the grade they get of me ranking every single starter and placing every starter into a tier, I then rank every team. Gronk spiked the like button. Don't forget to subscribe for more in-depth NFL rankings and analysis just like this. Nobody analyzes rosters like this. This is one of my favorite videos to do every year, so I hope you guys enjoy it. Let me know in the comments your opinion on my rankings, where I'm right, where I'm wrong, if I'm sleeping on a particular player on your favorite team, or if I'm too high on a player. Let me know in the comment section below. You will see every team's rankings in this video for each and every player. So let's get started. At number 32, surprisingly graded as the worst roster in the NFL, I have the New York Giants as the worst roster in the NFL. Now, they only feature one elite player. That is Dexter Lawrence, their big nose tackle, who's one of the best in the game. Otherwise, they have some good players like Andrew Thomas. They acquired Brian Burns, and the strength of their team is really their front seven. They have 4 players that graded at a good level or above in their front seven. They also have a young corner like Deonte Banks, who I'm excited for, and, of course, Thomas. But otherwise, they have some big-time holes at wide receiver where they're underwhelming outside of Malik Neighbors. Maybe he can become their other elite player, but for now, he's just a rookie, so we don't have much analysis to go on. The offensive line, they kind of did a better job of maybe upgrading the floor of that unit, but there's not a lot of superstars outside of the left tackle position. Their tight end is pretty weak. Their quarterback is pretty weak. Their running back is pretty weak. They don't have a lot of skill talent. In the secondary, they're very weak at safety, and they don't have a lot of depth at the corner position. They did re-sign Adoree Jackson, which I do think does help them, but overall, you look at this team, and besides the front seven, potentially a breakout from rookie Malik Neighbors, and a awesome left tackle and Andrew Thomas, there's just not a lot of talent on either side of the ball. So the New York Giants, a surprising bottom entry. I think there is definitely steam for people saying they're going to get the number 1 pick. Not only do people say that because of Daniel Jones, but it's also backed up here with just the roster talent being fairly weak. So at number 32, the Giants. The second worst roster in the NFL entering 2024 is honestly not that surprising in my opinion. It is the Arizona Cardinals. And I look at this team, and they're one that a lot of people want to believe in because they're an exciting team, especially when it comes to fantasy football. Kyler Murray, Trey McBride, Marvin Harrison Jr. It's going to be an exciting offense, even throw in James Conner. but the defense is so bad in terms of individual talent that it really weighs down this team. It's hard to say that in this division, they're going to break out and be a success in 2024. I still think they need another offseason of rebuilding this defense to give them true elite players or playmakers to actually put together something special. I will say that the Cardinals could be a case where if Kyler Murray becomes an elite player this year and elevates everybody around him, it's possible, he's shown flashes of that this team could be better than expected and better than the roster talent. And perhaps they have young players on defense that could surprise that we just don't really know are any good. So I will say that. But the Cardinals are pretty underwhelming from a roster standpoint. First of all, they don't have any elite players on their entire roster. Not a single one that I would categorize as an elite player. Trey McBride is a very good player. He could enter elite status at tight end this season and is expected to. Marvin Harrison Jr. is drafted to be an elite player, but we need to see it first, of course. Budda Baker was an elite player, but to me no longer is. He's only very good. And they do have some underrated pieces like Will Hernandez at right guard. I like the Jonah Williams pickup. I think Paris Johnson could get to an elite level, but it will take some time, especially moving from right to left and trying to figure out what his position is in the NFL and then just developing from that standpoint. So he could be surprising at that level. James Conner is underrated. Jalen Thompson's been consistently a very solid to good player. And I do think that overall they've tried to add some beef and lift the floor of the front seven, the defensive line. The secondary added rookies. Max Melton is intriguing. I really liked him in the draft. But overall, there's just not a lot that they did this offseason that moves the dial. They added guys like Bilal Nichols. Even their first-round draft pick in Robinson leaves something to be desired in terms of high-end potential. Sean Murphy-Bunting wasn't like an amazing pickup, in my opinion. I just feel like they don't have enough playmakers on the defensive side. I think the offense is underrated. They've got some nice pieces, but I just don't see it on defense, which weighs their roster down to the second worst in the NFL. The third worst roster in the NFL is the Los Angeles Chargers. That's right. And this is why I continue to fight back against the hype of the Chargers. You guys know I love the Chargers, just inherently. I always have. But when I see a roster that looks like this, I can't simply lie to you guys. Yes, they have some big names on the roster that I feel some of them are past their peak, like Khalil Mack or Joey Bosa, who's constantly injured, or even Derwin James, like guys that are well-regarded, well-known across NFL circles and NFL fandom, but are just not really the same players. I would regard Rashawn Slater and Khalil Mack as their best players on their team. I think that James and Bosa need to be more consistent, and Justin Herbert is an awesome player and perhaps their best player, but he's not quite elite level because he just hasn't had that winning team success that we look for in the best of the best quarterbacks, but he was in that next tier of guys. There's good players that I like Asante Samuel Jr. I think Gilman is underrated, the opposite safety from Derwin James, but they have so many weak pieces on this roster at the defensive line level, in the secondary. People don't really know who their second defensive lineman is, their second corner is, who their nickel corner is, who their linebackers are. They're very poor players, very poor starters. Their interior offensive line is suspect, especially post Corey Linsley. So this roster needs a lot of work under Harbaugh. It does appear that he could be an elite player. Ladd McConkey, I feel, could be a solid NFL receiver, but I don't really view even the youthful talent on this team the same as the Cardinals, where I'm like, ooh, look out for that roster. It could get a lot better, and it might be better than we think right now. The Chargers, it's more like, no, it's probably overrated because some of the guys that people highly rank are no longer at that level. So I feel confident about this ranking. I don't think this is a good roster at all. They have way too many holes, and they don't even really have enough depth either. So at number 30, the Chargers. At number 29, the Washington Commanders, that I honestly expected to finish maybe last or second last, but they're a little bit higher than I would have thought. Jonathan Allen is the best player on the team and their lone elite player. Meanwhile, Terry McLaurin, Daron Payne, Frankie Louvu rank as some very good players across their defense and offense. I think the problem with the Commanders is the depth and certain areas of their defense. The edge position is very underwhelming, and it's a very important position in modern NFL. The corner position is extremely weak and perhaps the worst in the NFL. Their linebacker position is strong. Their D-tackle position is strong. I think they have a little bit better of an offensive line in terms of individual talent than people give them credit for. Obviously, Jaden Daniels is an unknown. He's a rookie, but depending on how good he is, can he uplift people around him? Can younger guys like Coleman at left tackle elevate the offensive line? Can Luke McCaffrey come in and provide some playmaking presence to the slot receiver or receiver position? Right? I think Sam Cosmi is really underrated. Tyler Biadasz was a nice pickup. Frankie Louvu, of course, was an excellent pickup. And I think that's what you look for in terms of when you had an offseason and you spent this much money. It's nice to see that some of those players are in those good, very good categories. You're rarely going to get an elite player, but you can get good to very good players, and that really uplifts a roster. So I think overall, it might have a weaker floor than last year's roster in terms of you lost Montez Sweat, Chase Young, all that. Kendall Fuller, guys like that were established good players. But I think there's more youth on this roster. There's more young guns coming up. And there's also some nice savvy pickups they made this offseason to kind of get over those losses that they sustained with some of their veterans. So I think this roster overall, especially with Dan Quinn's coaching, I think the defensive side of the ball could be a unit where maybe we're surprised by how well they perform, but I feel like the offense is going to be a bit underwhelming because I don't love the receiving core. The running backs are fairly mid to average. I don't think there's a ton to love about the offense unless Jaden Daniels is a superstar. But at number 29, I have the Commanders. At number 28, the Denver Broncos. The Broncos are at number 28. Pat Surtain is their best player on this roster. And I think that's fairly obvious by a long shot. I mean, they don't really have anyone else that's considered for a Pro Bowl nod or an All-Pro. Everybody else is rather pretty underrated or just not that good, honestly. Like, they actually don't have too many weak level starters, which is nice to see with the Broncos. They have a lot of average players. They have a lot of average starters. I think their edge rush, Cooper, Browning, these guys are actually very underrated in my opinion. They had successful 2023 seasons. People are sleeping on that rotation up front. I think their O-line overall is fairly underrated, especially last year when they had Cushenberry at center. Now one of their weaker starters is Wattenberg. We'll see what he can bring this year in 2024. Greg Dulcich enters the fold as a playmaker. We kind of don't really know what he is yet, but he's interesting. Their receiving position overall is a massive wild card and unknown and question mark. Cortland Sutton's a good player. We can rely on him. He's not amazing. He's not elite, but he's a good player. Now, everybody else, Marvin Mims, right? What are we going to get out of him? Josh Reynolds has kind of proven that he's a number 3 in the NFL, so I'd call him maybe a solid player, but more like a weak player overall. Javonte Williams, he's coming off major injuries and had a really bad season last year, but he could be better this year and jump into a different category. Mike McGlinchey, he's kind of really good sometimes, but also really bad sometimes, so there's inconsistencies. I think their safeties are fine. Nothing too special there. I think the Broncos are, honestly, a team that could be elevated by coaching. I just think they have the problem of not enough elite players. We'll see what Bo Nix is at quarterback. I think they need help at receiver. I think they need help on defense in terms of elite playmakers. They're missing those players. But I do think they've got a nice foundation of solid players. So it's not absolutely terrible, but it's not near amazing either. So this team, I'm not really buying going over their win total or anything like that, like a lot of people say. They probably can keep some games tight, but I don't think they have enough elite players to make it really happen for them this year. At number 27, the New Orleans Saints. The Saints are at number 27. They have two elite players, in my opinion, Marshawn Lattimore at corner when he's on the field, and also Demario Davis of the linebacker position. Demario Davis has been one of the top 5 linebackers in the NFL for some time now, and I think those two players speak for themselves. Ryan Ramczyk, of course, is injured, so he wouldn't be included in the very good or elite category for me. Although if you did include him, it might bump their grade up pretty significantly because Trevor Penning is like one of the worst right tackles in the NFL. So he's obviously in the bum/weak category, but Ryan Ramczyk would probably be in the very good category. So that'd probably give them like 4 points just alone right there. But Chris Olave, Tyrann Mathieu, McCoy is an underrated center. Paulson Adebo, I think, is a very underrated perimeter corner, and he was kind of just left off my top 32 DBs list. Carl Granderson just slid on to my top 32 defensive ends, edge rushers list. And I think when we look at the Saints, the thing that stands out for me is they have a lot more weak starters than they've had in the past. You look at the interior defensive line, which used to have names like Sheldon Rankins and David Onyemata, and you look at the offensive line, positions of strength in the past when protecting Drew Brees in the Sean Payton era. And now it feels like the offensive lines and defensive lines, especially in the middle, are the weakest they've been in years, which is concerning when you're protecting a guy like Derek Carr. And then, just like small things like the third receiver, the overall receiving core is a little bit kind of just not sexy to me. The nickel position is meh. Like Alante Taylor, who they spent a high draft pick on, has been pretty bad overall. And I don't see like the upper echelon roster they used to have. They used to have waves upon waves on the D-line. They used to have an elite O-line. They used to have good enough weapons. They used to have like really deep secondary, and they just don't have that anymore. And that's kind of what happens when you try to spend a ton of money in free agency and you just can't keep everybody. So I have the Saints at number 27. I think the hype of them falling off is warranted due to this ranking. At number 26, surprisingly, the Carolina Panthers grade higher than the Saints. And I think that all comes down to their offensive line. I really do. I think the Panthers' offensive line being better than the Saints is the difference in the Panthers and the Saints, and would give me some confidence in predicting the Panthers to be better than the Saints this year. It's entirely possible. I do think the Saints have a better defense, though, but their elite player is Derek Brown, and it's their only elite player. Brian Burns was viewed as their other elite player for a period of time there, but he kind of fall off a little last year, and then he went to the Giants. But very good players. J.C. Horn obviously has elite potential. I think when he plays, he's been very, very good. It's just that the health has not allowed me to put him in the elite category. Deontay Johnson is like the 34th best receiver in the league. I'd categorize that as a very good receiver. I think he's like a really good 2 or like a below average 1. I think that Robert Hunt is one of the best guards in the NFL. I would say that he's probably a top 6-5 right guard in the NFL. Taylor Moton is a good right tackle. He's been just really steady for a number of years. And you could argue that Hunt and Moton are like debatably elite at times. They do have a lot of, I think, players that have been veterans, but are also still pretty quality players like Xavier Woods, who's coming off his best season of his career at safety, Shaq Thompson, who got injured last year, Jadeveon Clowney, who's coming off one of the best career seasons like in his entire tenure in Baltimore. Now he has to replicate that though, and you do worry about those guys in terms of their age and a fall off that could happen. Damian Lewis, I think, is a good left guard in the NFL. But they still have a lot of weaknesses. You look at center, that's a question mark with Corbett. You look at the interior defensive line outside of Derek Brown. Shai Tuttle's kind of been a miss for them. The corner position outside of J.C. Horn leaves something to be desired. The quarterback, Bryce Young, is bad. The running back, maybe Brooks could be a good player. Hubbard is kind of a weaker starter, but he is a good backup. So I look at the Panthers, and I think there's some areas where they're relatively solid, but I feel like there's just not a lot of names at any crucial position where I'm like, wow, that really, really allows them to win games, right? Like maybe JC Horn could be that guy at corner for them, but they don't seem to have that at receiver, edge rusher, quarterback, some of the main positions that they really needed at. So the Panthers, I do think have improved. I do think they have a steady, healthy group of vets, but also their youthful talent is pretty underwhelming. So the Panthers, I give them a 69. They're at number 26. At number 25 on my roster rankings. This one is going to hurt some feelings. It's the Los Angeles Rams. It is. The Rams do not have a great roster. A lot of their fans think they do. They do have quite a few very good players across their roster, especially on offense. They have multiple offensive linemen, multiple receivers, obviously Matthew Stafford, Kyron Williams. But you look at the defense and even the depth of the offense, and it's pretty suspect. So their best player on their team, in my opinion, is Puka Nacua. He's the only elite player on their team. Matthew Stafford is just below that as a very good quarterback, meaning he's the 6th or 7th best quarterback. I only had 4 quarterbacks as elite. And I think you know who those guys are. Stafford is in that next level of guys. Cooper Kupp, he had obviously a bad season, derailed by injuries. Could he be an elite player again? It's possible, but he is getting older, so I honestly would doubt it. Kyron Williams, if he has another season of super production, he could land himself an elite grading as well. But I think he's just outside of that, given his dynamic nature is not the same as some others. I think the offensive line, though, Jonah Jackson, Rob Havenstein, Kevin Dotson. Then you look at the defensive side. Kobe Turner, I think, is their best player now that Aaron Donald is gone. Cameron Curl was a nice pickup. Darius Williams was a nice pickup. Both of those veterans land in the good category. And you look at just the amount of players that they have in the weak category. Their tight end, Parkinson, not the best tight end in the league, right? Guys like Brown on defense. Their linebackers are both pretty unknown players. And when it comes to the Rams, they often grade poorly in this video because they have a lot of players playing for them immediately that haven't really proven anything to anyone. So it's hard to know how good they are, right? So only the Rams, Sean McVay, their coaching staff, their roster overall general manager, their defensive coordinator, only they know how good these players are, truly. Like, from the outside looking in, we don't really know how good Spites is. We don't really know. We haven't really seen him play. We know that John Johnson, as a vet that's been pretty bad in recent seasons, is probably not great anymore. But his best play came with the Rams, right? Trey White, he's probably not very good anymore. It's been a number of years since he was healthy for a consistent amount of games and played an elite level, right? Demarcus Robinson, we kind of know what he is. So there are players that we know, but we don't necessarily know how good Lake is or how good Avila is at center instead of guard. Jared Verse, he's a rookie. He could be an ascension type of player here. So I think the Rams are a very top-heavy team and a very one-sided team, which puts their grade a little bit higher than the rest of the list so far, but definitely lower than the rest of the list as well. So at number 25, the Rams. At number 24, the Las Vegas Raiders. I'm a little bit surprised that the Raiders didn't rank a little bit higher on the list. I'm honestly not going to lie about that, but I kind of see it. There's quite a few starters here that are just really weak points for them. Like their third receiver, Trey Tucker, I think is a very one-dimensional player. He's a stretch-the-field speed receiver. Jacorian Bennett was horrible as a rookie. You wonder if they should have upgraded that position, right? So that's kind of interesting. They have vets like Minshew at quarterback is obviously one of their biggest weaknesses. Cody Whitehair, John Jenkins, guys that have been around the NFL, that have been good players in the past, but are just not the same that they used to be, but they also have a number of very, very good players that every NFL fan really knows, right? Max Crosby, a defensive end, Christian Wilkins, a defensive tackle, Devontae Adams, a wide receiver. Those are their three elite players. And I feel like the Raiders have more of those than the other teams that have been on this list. Maybe the Rams are comparable in that nature. Colton Miller has been very good for a number of years. Andre James kind of made that leap the last couple of years to a very good center. Jacoby Myers is underrated. Nate Hobbs is underrated. I think Jack Jones is underrated. Robert Spillane is underrated. Malcolm Kuntz. All these guys that land in the good category, I would just make it the Raider underrated player category. All these guys are good players. Jacoby is a very good number 2 receiver for Devontae Adams because he's kind of a clone of him. Nate Hobbs is a really good nickel player, especially when he's in the nickel, but he has a lot of kind of dimension and versatility to his game. Good cover corner. Jack Jones is a playmaker on the ball. Robert Spillane had a huge jump at linebacker last year, was one of the best linebackers in football last year. Malcolm Kuntz is a very underrated number 2 on the opposite side of Max Crosby. And they do have some younger players that I think I look forward to maybe becoming elite, like Brock Bowers. I think we're still waiting for that ascension from Trayvon Moehrig, but he's only kind of provided safety play that's been solid across the board. I think Parham could potentially jump into a very good level of guard play. Munford has been inconsistent, but he's been decent. Zamir White is really intriguing. I think he's at least a solid starting running back in the NFL, but probably not like dynamic and elite. So the Raiders do have, I think, a very well-balanced roster. They've got good players on offense, good players on defense. There's just a couple holes on each side of the ball, quarterback, wide receiver, 3, corner, things like that, that kind of weigh them down. But the Raiders are solid across the board, very solid roster. So at number 24, the Raiders. At number 23, my New England Patriots, who surprisingly, even for me, rank at a 74. And a lot of people are calling the Patriots the worst roster in the NFL. And they consistently, and I'll say something about the Patriots, they consistently grade out as a much better roster in this video than if I were to just take 32 teams and then just rank them in terms of what I think off the top of my head, how good their roster is. The Patriots seem to do better in this video. And I think it's because just the way that Belichick built the roster in the past, he very rarely has starters that are just bad, like outright weaknesses. The team building philosophy of the Patriots has been, let's get a lot of solid, good players. Like, a lot of them aren't going to be elite players. A lot of them aren't going to be very bad players. They're just all going to be very solid. And that's why the Patriots grade out at a 74. You look at the number of players that they have in the very good, and solid categories. They have zero elite players. And that's a fact. They don't have a single elite player. They don't have an elite offensive lineman, defensive lineman. Maybe Christian Barmore would have graded there, but of course he's not playing this year, most likely. So he is a guy that's missing from this list, obviously. But they don't really have one. Maybe Christian Gonzalez can become one. Kyle Duggar is kind of teetering on an elite safety, right? Michael Onwenu is maybe closer to an elite guard, but not an elite tackle, right? But you look at the very good list, Michael Onwenu, no matter the position he plays at. Jabril Peppers had like the best season of his career last year, was awesome as a safety. Jonathan Jones, one of the most underrated DBs in the NFL every year. Dave Andrews is an awesome center. Good category. Hunter Henry is an above average tight end. Ramondre Stevenson is an above average running back. Tavai is a highly underrated linebacker, and same as Bentley. And then you look at the weaker categories. This is what really kills the Patriots. Wide receiver is their weaker category. KJ Osborne, right? Jacoby Brissett is a quarterback. He is weak. He's not good. He's probably the worst starter in the league. And Adrian Lowe at left tackle. So you look at the categories that the Patriots are weak in: quarterback, left tackle, wide receiver, and even now D-line because Christian Barmore's not there. And that's really, really hurting this team overall. That's what weighs down this team. But the roster otherwise, if you replace Jacoby Brissett with Josh Allen, or you replace Adrian Lowe with Trent Williams, the team would look a lot better. Or you replace KJ Osborne with Justin Jefferson and you got the other Viking receiver. It would make the overall team so much better just because the Patriots have these weaknesses in the keyest areas of a football team. So that's where you kind of get lost in how good is the roster and how good is the team. And of course, new coaching, rookie quarterback, all that sort of stuff could also derail the Patriots this year. But you look at the core of the team and they have plenty of depth on defense, a very good defense, which also elevates them on this list, and a pretty like average offensive supporting cast with like really weak parts. No number one receiver, no quarterback, no left tackle. So that's why the Patriots are at number 23. It's kind of a funky evaluation to have. At number 22, the Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings, I think, are fairly overrated as a roster, but I don't think that they're bad. I think this is a little bit of a jump up from the Patriots and the rest of the list. Justin Jefferson and Christian Darrisaw are their elite players. And I think the reason I say they're a little overrated is because I think we kind of talk about some of their players like they're elite, but they're not. They're like good, they're like above average, but they're not elite. Like, let's just take TJ Hawkinson. Like, TJ Hawkinson is not Travis Kelce, but everyone's like, oh, TJ, he's so good. You know, he's good. He's very good, but he's not Travis Kelce. He's not George Kittle, right? He's probably not even Sam Laporta, right? So then you look at Jonathan Grenard. They kind of dipped a little bit. They went from Danielle Hunter, who I have evaluated as an elite player, down to Jonathan Grenard, losing 2 points there. But Jonathan Grenard is very good. Andrew Van Ginkel does help them on the other side, though. A very underrated player. I don't know how many people would actually evaluate Andrew Van Ginkel in that category like I did, right? So he's actually probably boosted up on my list compared to other people's lists. Brian O'Neill, I do think, is safely a very solid, very good right tackle that every single season kind of plays to a certain level. But you look at some players like Aaron Jones and Jordan Addison, guys that people freak out for, right? But they're at this point, Aaron Jones, like a good running back, like he's above average, but is he special? Probably not. There's going to be the occasional game where he's amazing, but he just doesn't have the capacity, the bandwidth to carry all the load of an offense anymore. Jordan Addison, he's a good 2. I don't think he's like a great receiver overall. Like if you made him the number 1, I think he would probably be a little bit more underwhelming, right? Ivan Pace is underrated. Blake Cashman's underrated. Another name that I think I elevated compared to others, Blake Cashman. Stephon Gilmore was excellent with the Cowboys last year. I think that he'll be very good for them this year. Like I think he could be their best corner this season, at least at the beginning of the year. Byron Murphy is a good nickel. I think he's slept on for their defense. But they also have a number of weak points, like now left guard. They lost their left guard for the season. Sam Darnold's their quarterback. That might have been boosted up if JJ was playing, just because, you know, you look at the rookie position. Then you've got certain corners like Shaq Griffin could be their number 2 corner. That's pretty depressing. Jerry Tillery on the D-line's been a bust everywhere he's went. You know, their third receiver, their depth at receiver is more underwhelming than past seasons. I just feel like the Vikings, yeah, they actually have, you know, you look at Cross, like a lot of very good and good players, just too many bums and not enough elites. So they get put around average at about 75. There's a lot of teams in this clump of like a 75 through 80 in that range. There's a lot of these type of teams that, depending on your perspective on certain players, it may change this ranking. At number 21, I have the Tennessee Titans, who are bumped to a 78. The Titans, the thing about them is I think they have a lot more good players than people actually recognize, but they still have quite a few holes that could hold them back. Like, how good is Will Levis? I put him in the weak category for now, but he's certainly a wild card that could prove everybody wrong. Petite Ferrier, I don't know, Petite at right tackle, but Nicholas is not the best player, right? Can he be better this year? Redunds at right guard is a bit of a question mark. Their entire right side of their offensive line is a huge question mark. Now, with coaching, maybe it gets better, it improves. The potential could be there. The draft pick, the investment has been there. It's a matter of getting the play out of these guys. Kenneth Murray sucks. Like, he's just the definition of a bad linebacker. J.C. Latham is a good player. Tavondre Sweat, could be interesting. Like, he's got a lot of unique talent. Latham, they're expecting to be an elite tackle at some point. That's why they drafted him so high like they did. So he's a rookie right now, but similar to the players I talked about earlier, Malik Neighbors, Marvin Harrison, at his position, he's expected to become an elite player. Solid, they have a number of solid players. I like Tony Pollard at running back. I think he's potentially better than solid, honestly. He just had a down year last season. Okonkwo is a hit and miss, up and down, inconsistent playmaker, but he's got a lot of traits that I like. Amani Hooker is debatably a good safety, but he's kind of a one-dimensional coverage type guy. Quandre Diggs has regressed. He didn't have his best season with Seattle last year, but he did upgrade just the overall beef of the safety position for them. Arden Key's a guy that I've always liked. I do think he's a better 3 than a 2, though, and that's why I only list him in the solid. Skoronski's on the rise, though. McCreary's on the rise, though. These guys could really land themselves in the very good category with how they play at left guard and nickel. Awuzie definitely gives them a boost at number 2 corner. Obviously, L'Jarius Sneed is a huge pickup in the offseason, landing them an elite player. Simmons and Sneed are their elite players. And they also landed this offseason. Look at how many players they landed on this roster, right? In the elite and very good category, which boosted them up. They added Sneed, that's 1. They added Cushenberry, that's 2. They added Calvin Ridley, that's 3. They added Ernest Jones, that's 4 out of the 6 players that are in the very good or elite category, along with D-Hop and Jeff Simmons. That is insane. That is a really productive, good offseason that boosted this roster, right? Harold Landry, some people may say that he's more of a very good defensive end. I kind of think that he's floating around like a really good number 2, but not quite a number 1 type of edge rusher, kind of like a Leonard Floyd type for the majority of his career. So the Titans have a good roster that is really improved with a boost of good to very good players this offseason. I'm looking forward to seeing how that product comes out with a new coaching staff on offense, on defense. But the Titans, I think, are a bit underrated from a roster standpoint. At number 20, the Chicago Bears. That's right. The Bears are at number 20, a roster that everyone seems to love this offseason. DJ Moore and Jalen Johnson are their elite players. Montez Sweat is very close to that category. Edwards, I think, is one of the more underrated players on their team at linebacker. And Keenan Allen, we'll see how much he has left because he looked like Fat Keenan this offseason. But I still have to regard him as a very good receiver. So I look at this roster and I think that there's a lot of youthful, solid starters. But the question is, how many of those solid starters that are young can ascend to being good to great players? Like Tariq Stevenson, can he be a little bit more consistent and ascend to a very good level of corner and complement Jalen Johnson, right? Kyler Gordon at the nickel position, can he finally take that step forward? Then you look at players like Nate Davis, who maybe were a little bit underwhelming last year compared to past production in Tennessee. Darnell Wright, who was a first-round pick, can he become a very good tackle? So this is a roster that could get a lot better in a hurry just based on their overall play, in my opinion. Like, a lot of this solid category is like make or break for them, in my opinion. Then you look at the bums, Walker, Dexter, Bates. These are the holes on the roster. The defensive line and the offensive line are the biggest question marks about the Bears. And can Caleb really uplift everybody around him, uplift that offensive line, protect that offensive line, make plays, magic behind the line of scrimmage? And then the defense, I think the question is, can like Eberflus find a way to create pressure and create havoc without having an elite front outside of Montez Sweat, and a secondary that has many guys that could ascend, like I just brought up with Stevenson, Gordon, even a guy like Brisker. These guys are still young and up and coming and could potentially break out in 2024. So a very interesting roster. A very interesting roster where I could see them really ascending to a much higher level on this list than at number 20. So keep your eye out on the Bears. They're really fascinating because I think they've had massive holes in past seasons: D-line, pass rush, offensive line, protection, pass blocking, even quarterback play in the past. but now it feels like they could just be hitting that tipping point of becoming an excellent roster. And that's kind of where you lean into your analysis on predictions and teams, where to me, like, I could predict the Bears to be a playoff team this year because I see things falling their way. But in terms of roster rankings, kind of keeps you a little bit more grounded in terms of what they are right now. So that's why I have them at number 20. At number 19, tied with the Bears with a 78 grade. So depending on how you want to rank the Seahawks and the Bears, I decided to put the Seahawks above them, but depends on your opinion. At number 19, I have the Seattle Seahawks. Devin Witherspoon, DK Metcalf. The Seattle Seahawks are at 19. They are their elite players, in my opinion, with Devin Witherspoon and DK Metcalf. But they have a number of very good and good players. Kenneth Walker potentially is one of them that could jump into the elite category if given more volume in the backfield, pass catching, running the football. You also look at Connor Williams, who's an interesting one because he was added very late in this offseason due to a health concern. Can he still play at the level that he played in Miami? He's one of those that maybe is a make or break type of wild card to how well the offensive line plays. If he can play at that similar level like he did in Miami, that is a very good center that instantly upgrades the entire offense, right? Julian Love's an underrated safety, in my opinion, could play his best in this Mike Macdonald system. Reek Woolen had a bit of an undervalued season in terms of last season because he didn't have all the interceptions, but his coverage was fairly good. It's just that he's got to figure out his run defense, his run fits, and his tackling a little bit more. But overall, he is pretty locked down when he's focused. Then you look at Leonard Williams, who was a late addition to this team last season or a mid-season addition last year, and he was actually better in Seattle than he was previously. So you look at this roster, and I feel like there's a lot that I like. There's a lot of like football names like Baker and Dodson, linebackers that I think only true football fans really recognize or understand what their skills are and how they can play. And I'm really excited for them in a Mike Macdonald defense. Baker's speed and blitzing capabilities, Dodson, how he played with Buffalo last year. One of the make or break positions for them is wide receiver. Jackson Smith-Njigba could be an elite player soon or like a very good player soon. Like he could jump into the top 32 receivers in the NFL and I wouldn't be all that surprised. Meanwhile, Tyler Lockett could fall off the face of the planet and I wouldn't be that surprised, right? Geno Smith could definitely upgrade his game this year from a solid to a good quarterback once again after a little bit less of a season in 2023 than in 2022, his first year as a true starter. They still have a lot of holes when it comes to their edge rush, which kind of typically is a weakness of Mike Macdonald defenses, so I'm not too concerned there. They did lose Nwosu before the season started just for a short period of time, but they should get him back. So Draymond Jones is going to be playing a little bit more edge or like a rush position than typically assigned in Seattle last year. So that's one to watch out for. Boye Mafe, to me, is a little bit underrated in his ability. Cross is a player that was a first-round pick and should be better than he is right now, but he's been dealing with injuries, in and out of the lineup, things like that. He could potentially make his way high up this list. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Cross became, one of their best, if not their best offensive linemen. But they still have a lot of weaknesses in terms of their offensive line, right tackle, left guard, right guard, all weaknesses for me. Rayshawn Jenkins isn't my favorite safety in the world, although I felt like he's played a lot of football, a lot of snaps, and he could be better than expected in Mike Macdonald's defense. And overall, their corner position, their third corner is kind of a hit and miss situation. I don't really know what's going to happen there. So is it Trey Brown? I don't know, but we'll see. But Byron Murphy is really exciting. I do think eventually he'll be like a top 20 D tackle in the NFL, at least. So I'm looking forward to his play coming out of Texas and playing for the Seahawks in this Macdonald defense. I think the Seahawks have a solid roster across the board. They have a lot of elements to be very excited about. They have a core of pretty young players, and it's headlined by Witherspoon, one of the most unique defensive backs, and Metcalf, one of the most unique receivers. So the Seahawks tied with the Bears at 78 in terms of grading, but I just nudged them above at number 19. At number 18, the Pittsburgh Steelers have a 79, 1 point above the Seahawks and the Bears. Their best players are Minkah Fitzpatrick and TJ Watt, and they clearly have one of the best defenses in the NFL. Of their players that rank in elite, very good, and good, they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 defenders in a good or above category. Joey Porter Jr., Alex Highsmith, Pat Queen, Cam Hayward, Minkah Fitzpatrick, TJ Watt. Their only offensive players that are in a good or above is Pat Freiermuth in good, George Pickens, and Isaac Seumalo in very good. So their clear weaknesses are on offense. The offensive line is one of those units that's a bit more questionable. Fatanu is a rookie at right tackle. Broderick Jones is a year 2 player at left tackle who didn't play that well last year, but I would expect to do better things this year just because of the freakish nature that he is and the improvement that you would see through another full offseason. And I think in Arthur Smith's system, the offensive line in general will improve. They're also starting 2 rookie linemen, Zach Frazier at center, who's a bit of an unknown. I really didn't know of this Bishop Jr., but their weakest player on their team is like the nickel position. It's the weakest position on their entire team. Dante Jackson has shown flashes of good corner play. Can he be a solid 2 for Porter is the question. Russell Wilson, can he be a steady game manager at quarterback? And obviously, everybody knows their receiver position is very weak. Van Jefferson, Calvin Austin. I think their linebacker position is one of the most underrated in football just in terms of the variety and the depth that they actually have on their roster. Landon Roberts is one of those players. Deshaun Elliott, I feel, was a very nice pickup and an upgrade at safety to complement Minkah Fitzpatrick. And their running backs are very good too in tandem, Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. And Najee Harris, to me, will be the true starter, while Warren is the change of pace. But collectively, they have a good running back position. It's more so just picking just Najee. He's probably just a solid starter and nothing more. But the Steelers are at number 18 in the top 20. And this feels about right for where the team is evaluated. Maybe, they're about the 18th best roster, but with Mike Tomlin's magic added on top, they could be a playoff team. That's kind of how the Steelers feel. So this one feels pretty accurate to me. At number 17, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a roster that used to be the best in the NFL, in my opinion, when they were winning the Super Bowl in 2020, 2021. I thought this was the best roster in football. It's not that same level, but it's still, I think, a little bit better than people give it credit for. They have a number of elite players. They have 4 elite players: Antoine Winfield, Levante David, Tristan Wirfs, and Mike Evans. And I don't think anybody would really even argue with those 4 elite players. In the very good category, I think there would be some people that would argue Vita Vea is actually elite. But I have him in the very good category. Chris Godwin is a player that has been elite before. He's in the very good category. So even when you look at the categories and the listings, I don't think there's much debate for their top players on their team. It's more so like the bottom end starters that hold them back a bit. And some of their younger players that maybe could get better, but they just feel like they haven't exactly hit on their first, second round picks lately. They've just become okay players and like nothing special, but Kalijah Kancey could be the one that stands out that could enter the very good or elite category in 2024. Jamel Dean has just been a good starting corner in the NFL. Luke Gedeke has finally evolved into, in my opinion, a good right tackle. The position that he was actually drafted to play, he was terrible at guard, like awful, like the worst guard in the league in 2022. Rashad White is a good running back. I would say he's got multi-dimensional facet to him, like good pass catching. He's I think, just really helpful player to have come out of the backfield. Baker is a solid quarterback. You can win with him. He is a little bit situation dependent, though. I think some people would argue he's good. I think most people would say he's fairly average. Yaya Diaby is another younger player that maybe could take another step forward this year. He was promising as a rookie. They get Jordan Whitehead back. He's really better in this system than most other places. Cade Otton is like the most replaceable tight end in the league. And then they've got, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka is one of those players that hasn't hit. He was a first-round pick. I just don't think he's very good, but they still continue to start him. I'm not sure why. Cody Mock was pretty bad as a rookie. We'll see if he can evolve. I don't love Bredesen, that pickup at left guard. And McCollum, he's okay. He's nothing. I don't know if he's a starting capable corner. They lost Carlton Davis. McCollum's interesting. He could be decent, but I don't really know. I'm mostly high on KJ Britt, though. I just couldn't put Britt any higher than where I had him just because Britt hasn't really played a ton of snaps. So I can't put guys that haven't played a ton of snaps any higher than that. And they do have 3 rookies that will contribute in a starting role. Smith is one to watch at the nickel position, a position that typically has been weak for the Bucs. McMillan as their 3rd receiver, I think could give them a boost at the wide receiver position. And Barton is the big one. Graham Barton is an absolute beast. He could be very soon one of the best centers in the NFL. So the Bucs are a very solid 80, a borderline top half team in the NFL, top half roster in the NFL. And that feels about right. I feel like their roster uplifts their coaching and always has in recent seasons. I feel like the reason they made the playoffs last year is because of those veteran, very good players like Mike Evans, Antoine Winfield, Levante David, Tristan Wirfs, their individual performances propelling them to a division victory. The question is, can their coaching be good enough to allow this roster to continue to be at the top of their division? And it's going to be difficult because the Falcons, they're on the rise. They haven't been on this list yet, and they're probably going to be higher than you guys expect. So at number 17, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. At number 16, this is probably the lowest this team has ever ranked on this list for me. That is the Buffalo Bills. Smack dab average roster. The Buffalo Bills are 1 point ahead of the Buccaneers because their only elite player on their team is Josh Allen. And I continuously say this in my videos, that Josh Allen is the reason the Bills are a success. The reason the Bills are as good as they are. The reason the Bills were so close to knocking off the Chiefs despite all of the injuries they had on defense last year. The Buffalo Bills have a number of very good players. They have a number of very good players that are highly unrecognized and highly underrated, but they also have a lot of areas that are just like not extremely explosive or elite. So the very good category is full. I mean, they've got James Cook at running back, Deion Dawkins at left tackle, Dalton Kincaid at tight end, who's going to be awesome this year. I think he could jump into the elite categories. So could James Cook. And you could already debate that Deion Dawkins is an elite left tackle. Ed Oliver is a borderline, like one of the first to just be removed from that elite category, but he is very good. Greg Rousseau has the talent to be elite, but hasn't quite reached it yet. Rasul Douglas has elite ball skills, but probably is an elite corner. And then Teron Johnson is the closest nickel to be left off the elite list in the very good category. Christian Benford is one of them that probably maybe elevated a little bit in my mind as opposed to others, but I think he's highly underrated. A very good number 2 corner. So their secondary is really the strength of their team, in my opinion, in terms of their corner position. Rasul Douglas, Teron Johnson, Christian Benford, all being in the very good category. And then their tight end, their running back, the middle of the field offense, along with their left tackle. Spencer Brown is probably their most underrated player based on his improvement and then how he played in 2023. Bernard is one to watch in terms of his playmaking capacity at linebacker. Daquan Jones has been good for them since signing there. But you look at this team and probably only Coleman will get a lot of snaps as a rookie. Maybe Bishop at safety. Linebacker, Matt Milano really hurts this team. He would have been the other elite player. So they lose 6 points basically based on losing Matt Milano. So they would have been an 87 if they had Matt Milano instead of Dorian Williams, who's definitely not anybody that should be well regarded. I mean, he has some potential. He was a former 3rd-round pick. He's shown like an ability to play for this defense, but Matt Milano is different, right? So this defense, this team, this roster would be like 6 points higher if not for the Matt Milano injury. And perhaps down the stretch where I think they'll get better as a team and some of these younger players will break out and hit a different level like Kincaid, where they could be on the rise throughout the season, right? Then you look at the solid category. Taylor Rapp, that's kind of what he's been his whole career. Edwards, I'm expecting solid play once again at left guard from him. You know, no matter where he's been good. Torrance is a second-year player that maybe has more potential than just being solid. Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir. Shakir could also jump into like the good category, and I wouldn't be very surprised this season. AJ Epinesa, he is expected to be their starting end on the opposite side of Greg Rousseau. I've loved his small role on this team. I'm really intrigued by him as a full-time starter. Von Miller's also a huge X factor for this team. Not included as a starter because he's more of a rotation piece. But I also don't know why they're starting Damar Hamlin. I have no idea why he is listed as the starter. I am shocked that Mike Edwards is not playing over him. But maybe Damar Hamlin has all of a sudden become healthy. I hope he does well. But the Bills are at 81. Kind of a team that definitely feels like it could be a better roster near the end of the year, especially if Matt Milano comes back, than it is at the beginning. There's a lot of question marks about it, but still enough stable, good players to uplift them early in the season. At number 15, the Dallas Cowboys, who actually are listed at the same level as the Buffalo Bills. And the reason for that is the Bills have more solid, good, very good players. The Cowboys have more elite players than just Josh Allen alone, but they have a lot more weaknesses that are actually starting for them, right? So CeeDee Lamb, Micah Parsons, Tyler Smith, almost said Tyron Smith, and Zach Martin. This team still has 4 absolute studs. 2 on the offensive line. Both their guards are phenomenal. Micah Parsons and CeeDee Lamb. Cowboys fans, some of them out there, would argue that Dak is elite, although I don't know how you really could. Odigizua is probably their most underrated player on their roster. DeMarcus Lawrence is very good and at times elite, and so is Trevon Diggs, who was injured last year. It's hard to put him in the elite category. They do have good players. Their safeties, I think, are good. Brandon Cooks, still, I put in that good category, although some people would argue he is regressing and should be in solid. That's fine. Jake Ferguson is in the good category. I think he's definitely above average as a tight end, borderline top 10. So you look at the Dallas Cowboys and you say, I just feel like they have too many weaknesses. Their running back position, their right tackle, their center's a huge question mark. Their interior defensive line, if Mozzie Smith is the starter, that's not good news. You know, they brought in some veterans to hopefully raise the floor of that position. Their linebackers are underwhelming, even with the addition of Eric Kendricks. Jalen Tolbert as a third receiver. He could be a good third receiver. I won't disregard that. I think he will have a better season this year. But as an overall starting receiver, there's teams that have 3 number 1s on their team, 3 number 2s on their team. The Cowboys, it feels like Tolbert and Cooks, Cooks is regressing and Tolbert's more of a 4, right? And so I just look at this team and I feel like they're underwhelming at a number of positions, which keep them lower on this list than you would expect. They also have more young players playing than anyone really has seen from this team in recent years, like Guyton at left tackle instead of Tyron Smith, right? They lost Tyler Biadasz. They lost a Stephon Gilmore. They lost a Dorrance Armstrong. Some of these players really helped their roster, especially in the middle tier of their roster. So yeah, I think the Cowboys are definitely the least talented they've been in recent years. But they still got studs, which gives them hope. So at number 15, the Cowboys. At number 14, the Indianapolis Colts. The Colts, DeForest Buckner, Quentin Nelson, Jonathan Taylor went on the field. Are there elite players? The thing about the Colts has always been, and they will evaluate and they will grade better in this video than they, in my opinion, would for a lot of people if you put into account the position that they play, right? The Colts are very good at finding players that are elite at sort of the, let's just call it, less important positions. They're better at finding running backs. They're better at finding guards. They're better at finding, offensive line in general, defensive tackle, linebacker, like positions that we don't regard as needing them to win, right? We need left tackle. We need receiver. We need quarterback. We need corner, right? A lot of these positions, like D tackle, you could argue that that's definitely crucial, but the Colts are mostly making their money on, and this is Ballard, making their money on the niche positions, right? You look at all their good players, Buckner and Grover Stewart at D tackle, Quentin Nelson at guard, Braden Smith at right tackle, Ryan Kelly at center, right? Even like Moore, right? At nickel corner, right? Then you look at Julian Blackmon, safety. Zaire Franklin, linebacker. Again, like, I don't see quarterback. I see one receiver, Michael Pittman, right? I don't see corner here. So it's like, that's the weird thing with the Colts in their evaluation is they have a lot of good players at the positions that people don't really recognize as being important, if that makes sense. But they do have good players. I think like a lot of these guys are really underrated, like Blackmon, Franklin, Moore still is underrated, Grover Stewart. I think Kelly is one of the best centers in the NFL. Smith is one of the best right tackles. Those two guys were almost in the elite category, and it would have boosted them up. Pay is a good player, although hasn't reached elite yet. Raymond was promising last year. EJ Speed, I think, is a little underrated. Juju Brents is a make-or-break corner for them. And you look at the bums, well, tight end, obviously. Richardson is obviously a wild card. He could be a good quarterback, but we just don't really know. He's a huge X factor. Their corner position in general is very weak. And Latu, I'm very high on. Mitchell, Josh Downs I kind of like Josh Downs, but I don't know, like, it'll be interesting to see the Colts this year. I think a lot of it relies on Anthony Richardson to be a great player. And I don't love their secondary. I don't love certain things about their roster, but I also love some of the beef of their roster, like the O-line and the D-line and the linebackers and things like that. So Colts are a quality roster for sure. One that is worthy of making the playoffs. But when you don't have elite receivers or elite corners or elite quarterbacks, or a bad tight end, like, these things don't help you win in the NFL. So that's why I have them at number 14. At number 13, the Jacksonville Jags. Colts fans, not going to like this ranking. Right above the Colts. And honestly, it's pretty interchangeable. The Jags do have less elite players, in my opinion, but the impressive part about Jacksonville's roster is the amount of good and very good starters that they have. They may not have a lot of elites, but they have a lot of good to very good. Josh Hines-Allen is their best player on their roster, and I don't think that's really debatable, to be honest. Trevor Lawrence has not lived up to generational talent. I think he's been a good quarterback and sometimes a very good quarterback, but he hasn't quite reached that status. Now, when I'm talking about the good and very good, they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 players in the good to very good category. And you could even throw in, like, Ronald Darby at times has been a good player. Ezra Cleveland at times has been a good player. You can put those guys in those categories. Brian Thomas Jr. as a rookie could be a very good receiver or a good receiver, and I wouldn't be shocked, right? So you look at Jacksonville's roster, they have very few actual weaknesses. Their D-line is very, very solid across the board in terms of their starters. I think that Trayvon Walker is going to have a huge season. I think Devin Lloyd could have a huge season at linebacker. Andre Sisco could ascend at safety. Campbell could ascend at corner back to elite status, because in 2022, he was a borderline elite player at that position. They paid him like he was, and he kind of had some injuries last year that kind of derailed him. But that was the story of this team last year. I think people are sleeping on Jacksonville, the amount of talent they have. You throw in a good quarterback, a well-proven coach, and really the only things you wonder about this team are the offensive line, where a majority of their weaker players lie, right? Left guard, left tackle, right tackle are kind of their weaknesses, mostly tackle just in general. Mitch Morse, I think, definitely helps. I think that Brandon Scherf played really well for them last year. I think Ezra Cleveland was helpful for them last year. It's mostly left tackle with Cam Robinson, who's kind of been a bust for them, including the contract, and Antoine Harrison as a rookie was pretty bad. So they need better offensive line tackle play. They could use slightly better play in the middle of their secondary at safety in somebody like Antonio Johnson, who's a relative unknown, and Darnell Savage, who comes to the team from Green Bay and is going to be playing now at nickel instead of safety, I believe. So that's kind of a wild card selection or pickup for them. But I do think their defense will ascend because they have a better coach there. I think their offense will just be healthier, more productive, more consistent. Trevor Lawrence, I think, will have a good year. So I'm looking forward to this team. I think that Jacksonville is an underrated roster. There's a lot of players here that don't get coverage at a mainstream level, like Campbell, like Aluakon, like even Travis Etienne. doesn't get a lot of coverage. Like a lot of names, Roy Robertson Harris, guys that I really, really like, really respect their roles on this team. I think this is a borderline top 10 type of roster, but it is in that sweet spot where I feel like they probably will have a top 15 defense, a top 15 offense, and it makes sense that their roster would be evaluated at about 13. At number 12, the Miami Dolphins. Miami Dolphins. Yes, I sing this song in every single video I talk about the Dolphins, and I do not care. Take that, Durkant. I'm a bigger fan of the Dolphins, by the way, than Durkant. I selected Tua Tagovailoa and Jalen Waddle in the fantasy league of the BLV. So take that, Dolphins fans. You think I hate you? Well, really, your own fan base hates you. How about that? Javon Holland is one of their best players, probably their second best defensive player, Jalen Ramsey being their best. Offensively, they've got two elite receivers, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, who I both put as elite players. I had about 14 elite receivers, 13 elite receivers. He was one of them. Tyreek Hill was obviously one of them. He's the best player in the NFL, according to the players. So yes, obviously. Teron Armstead at times plays like an elite player, but I think he overall evaluates as a very good player. Zach Sealer is probably one of the more underrated, very good players in football. Jalen Phillips is at times elite, but he's coming off an injury, which also hurts his stock. The good players, Raheem Mostert or whichever running back they have, a lot of it is aided by scheme, but I feel like anyone they put in is going to be good. Calais Campbell, I thought he actually was good last year, so I like that pickup for them. Kendall Fuller, I like that pickup for them as well. I think he played better than Howard did last year. And in more of a zone type of system, he's probably a better fit. And Tua, I actually had him in solid, but I boosted him to good after I picked him in fantasy. I'm just kidding. I just boosted him because I didn't feel like he fit that solid category. I think it was better than that. And then the solid category, I think Jonnu Smith is a playmaker at tight end. He has a unique skill set that makes him a solid starting tight end. Jordan Poyer, we'll see if he's still that good. Jordan Brooks is very inconsistent, but shows flashes of high upside. David Long, I think, could be debated to be a good linebacker. Robert Jones is probably more so on the edge of being a bum, but he actually graded out well, like 44th by PFF last year. And Austin Jackson, I've never been a fan, but he played his best last year out of all the seasons. And the bums, obviously the offensive line, Aaron Brewer, Liam Eichenberg. I'm not a huge fan of Kohu personally. Anytime he goes on the outside, he is like a retread. But in the nickel spot, he's not terrible. He's actually a good pass rusher, good playmaker. But in terms of his coverage, it leaves something to be desired. Braxton Berrios, good returner, good TikToker, not a great receiver overall. He does make some plays, but it's more so like, oh, there's Braxton Berrios. I forgot he was in the NFL, right? And then Chop Robinson is the lone starter in for Bradley Chubb. If they had Bradley Chubb instead of Chop Robinson, I'd add 2 points to their roster. It would be an 86, and I think it would move them up the list. But the Miami Dolphins, good roster. I think a lot of people see them as top 10. They're just outside for me because of things like the offensive line, linebacker, small areas of their team that I think are, they have a lot of big names on their team. A lot of marquee positions as well that they get right. Receiver, corner, even safety to a degree, and left tackle. So they've got a lot of the main areas. And if you want to argue Tua, quarterback as well. At number 11, probably a shocking entry on the list. For many people, without doing this research and actually ranking all the players, they would probably have this team inside their top 5. But not me. I have the Philadelphia Eagles at number 11. And that's because I think they have a very top-heavy roster in terms of their starters. They have quite a few players that will be playing regular snaps as starters that are just flat-out weaknesses and attack points for opposing teams. Corner, Isaiah Rodgers is expected to start at corner. Quinyon Mitchell, first-round pick, probably going to be playing the nickel spot, which was a little unexpected. Hopefully Rodgers is better than I expect. That's one example. Their linebacker position. Both of their linebackers, Devin White, Zach Bond, are both weaknesses. Their linebacker position is putrid. It's not good. It hasn't been good. Jordan Davis He's a big name. He's a Georgia Bulldog. He's an ultra favorite, but he's not a Mitch favorite. He hasn't done anything. What has he done for me? Mekhi Becton has potential. Former first-round pick, former tackle, though, making his way inside to play right guard and start at right guard for the Eagles, who are well regarded as one of the best lines in the NFL. I'd still say that. But those players, Jahan Dotson included, who I don't think is very good. There's a reason he was traded by the team that picked him in the first round. It's because he's not that good. So I look at the Eagles and I think, yes, they have their elites, but they don't have quite as many elites as they've had. Right? They've got A.J. Brown, they've got Jalen Carter, Jordan Mailata, and Lane Johnson. 4 elite players, right? Not 7, not 8, not 9, like maybe they used to have. Saquon is close to elite, but honestly, like I love Saquon as much as the next guy. I've loved Saquon. You guys know I love Saquon. He's not elite. He's just not elite. Like, he's not as explosive as he used to be. He's kind of overrated at this point, honestly. Like, all of a sudden, he goes on the Eagles, and he just becomes a little bit overrated. Devontae Smith, very, very good player. Very good receiver. He's not elite, though. He's very good. Josh Sweat, very good pass rusher. Huff, very good pass rusher, limited run defender. Dallas Goedert, very good tight end. Wish he was more productive. Landon Dickerson, very good guard. I don't think he's an all-pro. So I look at it and I say, yeah, they've got about, 11 very good or elite players. That's half their starters, right? That's half their starters. Many of them are on the D-line or the O-line, which is classic Eagles, right? Landon Dickerson, Mailata and Johnson, Sweat, Huff, and Carter. They've got 2 receivers and a running back and a tight end. Jalen Hurts might be in the very good for other people. He's in my good category. I see him more as a 11 through 16 type quarterback than I do a top 10 quarterback. Darius Slay has certainly taken a step back. I have him as a good corner and no longer an elite or a very good corner. CJ Gardner-Johnson, who played amazing for the Eagles in 2022, maybe he gets back to that level, but he's been very inconsistent throughout the majority of his career. Blankenship, I'm not a huge fan of. I was honestly nice in putting him in the solid. Cam Jurgens, I was also pretty nice putting him in the solid because he's never really played center at the NFL level, but he is a very athletic, great prospect who is good at guard, so I suspect he'll be at least a solid center, and that's his natural position, so he could be very good, but it should take some time. So the Eagles are very good, don't get me wrong, especially on O-line and D-line still, but their weaknesses at third receiver, their weaknesses at the corner position, the linebacker position, right? Even to a degree, the interior defensive line is what weighs them back. And there's some very good rosters that are just slightly ahead of them, mostly because they just have, instead of 6 very goods, they have 6 elites. So that's kind of just how the grading works out. But it's a very, very good roster. It's just, I don't think it's as good as 2022 or last year's roster entering the season in terms of evaluating the actual talent. So at number 11, the Eagles. The top 10 rosters in the NFL today. At number 10, the surprise entry. If they had a quarterback last year, they probably would have made the playoffs. They've added Matt Judon. They've added Justin Simmons. Yes, the Atlanta Falcons are a top 10 roster entering 2024. They're more than just a team in a bad division. They're a pretty complete roster with, in my opinion, at least 1, 2, maybe 3 good players at every level of their team. Offensive line, they have the best right guard in the game, arguably, Chris Lindstrom. They have a top 3 running back, in my opinion, Bijan Robinson. Certainly in terms of talent, but I believe he's going to have an awesome season this year in 2024. Jesse Bates is a top 3 or 4 safety in the NFL, and some would argue he's the best free safety in the NFL. They have a very good number 1 corner in A.J. Terrell. They have now Matt Judon to provide a pass rush. Inside, they have David Onyemata and Grady Jarrett. They have Drake London and Kyle Pitts to catch the football, and even Darnell Mooney. They have Caleb McGarry at right tackle, Jake Matthews at left tackle, so they're pretty secure at the tackle positions and probably have a top 5 or 6 tackle duo in the NFL. They have an above-average quarterback in Kirk Cousins. And really, you look at this team, and there's just not that many holes any longer. I feel like they fulfilled them with the safety position in Justin Simmons and the edge rush position in Matt Judon. Both previously were weak starters, like putrid positions. So that upgraded them from probably like an average roster to a top 10 roster. Going from bad to like above average at those two positions. And you look at the weak areas for them. Well, linebacker potentially, the guy that plays alongside Ellis, Troy Anderson, or is it Landman? I don't know. Could be both. Now, Landman actually played well for them last year, I would say, and I would have graded him as a solid player. But because Troy Anderson hasn't really played much, and he's the projected starter, it does give you confidence because he's really athletic and has shown flashes, but I haven't seen anything consistent for me to put him a level above, a weak starter. The corner positions outside of AJ Terrell are probably the biggest weaknesses on the team. Can Alford and Hughes hold up in coverage? If teams are kind of shying away from wherever AJ Terrell is at and throwing on those guys, can they make those plays? That's a big X factor and wild card for this team. And then the third receiver position. They don't have great receiver depth. Rondell Moore got injured. They traded for him for Desmond Ridder, actually. So now it might be Ray McLeod or something like that. So not the greatest depth at wide receiver, but when you look at the line of scrimmage, they've got some really good run defenders. They've got David Onyemata, Grady Jarrett inside. And I feel like their pass rush really is aided by Matt Judon. Ebiketie had like a quiet 6 sacks last season. Carter can play some snaps. Overall, I feel like the offense all the way around is very solid. You add in some big-time playmakers at every level of the defense, and you have yourself a solid top 10 roster. So with an 88 grade, the surprising entry of the Falcons. At number 9, the Houston Texans. The Houston Texans are on this list, and they're actually tied with my number 8 team. I'm a little surprised the Texans aren't higher on my list, I'm not going to lie. But they only have 3 elite players: Danielle Hunter, Laramie Tunzel, and Nico Collins. These 3 players were the only guys that graded as elite. But they have many players that could be elite, right? Derek Stingley could become elite this year. He was very good last year. Can you take another step up? Will Anderson, Rookie of the Year defensive player last year. Could he be elite this year? Very possible, right? I had him just outside the top 10. He was actually like the first guy in the very good category, so a bit unfortunate. Same as CJ Stroud. He was the first quarterback, my number 5 quarterback, who did not make my elite list, and I'm still contemplating that because I really want to put him there. It's just that he's only had 1 season, same as Will Anderson, so it's kind of hard to put them in the elite category because there's veterans that have done it for years, right? Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell are both very explosive, good options at wide receiver. Shaq Mason is a very steady guard, and I think just very good every year. So you have some guys like Stroud, Stingley, and Anderson that could very easily be put into the elite category, which would catapult the Texans into a different stratosphere of talent. Like they would be near 100 in terms of their grade, which would put them in the top 5, right? But those points just move them slightly outside of that at number 9, right? The good category, both their linebackers, I think, fit into this category with Harris and Al-Shaair, probably the most underrated combo in the league entering 2024. Mixon helps them at running back and upgrades that level of their team. Schwartz, not Schwartz, the defensive coordinator of the Browns, Schultz, the tight end formerly of the Cowboys. He is in the good category, former Pro Bowler actually, and has played very good at times, but he's a secondary piece to this offense. Jimmy Ward, I've always been a fan of. He also fits in the good category. Fatu Kazi is the best piece of their interior D-line, which their interior D-line is not the best. I'm going to be honest. It's not my favorite. Mario Edwards is one of their weaker players. He starts alongside Fatu Kazi, but Danico Autry, once he comes back, could play some pass rushing snaps from that position as well, which would upgrade, at least in terms of their pass rushing sub-package defense. Scruggs and Green kind of highlight their biggest weakness, which is the interior O-line and the interior D-line. It's interesting that that's how they've built this team, but Scruggs and Green were also both high-end draft picks who have not played up to that level. So can they upgrade their level of play and simply move to solid starters? That would also make the Texans much higher on this list and lead me to believe that this is going to be like a top 3 roster in the league. So overall, they've got a lot of players here. Jalen Petrie, who's now playing nickel instead of safety, he could also catapult himself at the position he played in college to a very good Pro Bowl type of level because he's a great tackler. He sees the football really well. I could see him having an excellent season at that position. Titus Howard, we've been waiting for the breakout at right tackle. He's been injured quite a bit. He's had to play guard a bit, so he's been inconsistent. But the Texans have so much talent, and this doesn't even speak to their depth, where they have a ton of depth at positions like corner, defensive end, wide receiver. So the Texans are an extremely talented roster. At number 8, the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals are at 89, and the thing about the Bengals is a lot of people would just look at them and probably say, because they have Burrow and Chase and Higgins and all that, like, yeah, people would eyeball them and say they're around the top 10. But I think where the Bengals are extremely underrated as a roster is how many good starters they have on their team. It's not necessarily that they have a ton of superstars. They actually only have 3 elite players, the same number as the Texans. Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, Trey Hendrickson. Those are clear and obvious, right? T. Higgins, Mike Hilton, Logan Wilson, Trent Brown, all capable of playing at an elite level, but too inconsistent, so I put them in very good. T. Higgins, he maybe could have the best season of his career in a contract year. Trent Brown, when he's motivated and healthy, is a phenomenal player. And we know that Logan Wilson has been kind of elite in the past, as well as Mike Hilton being a top 6 or 7 nickel. It's just that he wasn't quite in that elite shutdown type of territory. So I didn't put him in the elite category. But they have probably the most players in the good category, which gets you 4 points out of any team in the league. They have Orlando Brown at left tackle, Alex Kappa at right guard, Ted Karras at center, BJ Hill on the defensive line, Sheldon Rankins on the defensive line, Sam Hubbard on the defensive line, Jermaine Pratt, who could have been in the very good category, by the way, at linebacker, Cam Taylor-Britt, who could be in the very good category next year, and Geno Stone, who also was debatably in the very good category. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 good players. That's a lot of good above average starters. On top of the elite or very good players, they have 16 out of 22 players that are above average. But they just don't have enough elite or very goods. They just have a lot of goods, which overall in the math doesn't get them into the top 5, but it keeps them in the top 10. Mike Gesicki is just okay. He's solid at tight end. Their tight ends have never been fantastic. Volson has been improving, but he's still a bit of a weakness. Jordan Battle actually had a great rookie season, but I'm looking for more. Von Bell would have also graded at a solid, but it does appear that Battle is going to be the primary starter there. Chase Brown is a bit of a wild card and unknown, but he could definitely take off this season and have a breakout year. Running back and DJ Turner as the number 2 corner potentially, or even they could have potentially Dax Hill play that position. I wouldn't be shocked. So, yeah, I feel like the Bengals, their roster is just good. It's above average pretty much across the board. And their elite players like Hendrickson, Chase, and Burrow elevate them to being a championship level team. So I have them at number 8 on my list. At number 7, the rival, the Baltimore Ravens. They score a 91. And the difference between the Ravens and the Bengals is pretty interesting. So personally, I would rather have a roster like the Bengals. The Bengals have more above average players, but the Ravens have more elite players. And that's the difference in the grading. So the Ravens, while the Bengals only had 3 elite players, the Ravens actually have one of the highest counts of elite players. They have Kyle Hamilton, Tyler Linderbaum, Derrick Henry, Lamar Jackson, Justin Madubuike, and Roquan Smith. That's 6 elite players that are very, very, very good players at their positions. Marlon Humphrey, Zay Flowers, Mark Andrews, and Marcus Williams are also very good players. So that's 10 players that are rather almost elite or elite. That is a lot. That's nearly one side of the football, right? And there's at least one at every position group. Like offensive line, Tyler Linderbaum, quarterback Lamar Jackson, running back Derrick Henry, tight end Mark Andrews, almost, Zay Flowers at wide receiver, right? Defensive line, Justin Madubuike, linebacker Roquan Smith, safety Marcus Williams and Kyle Hamilton, corner Marlon Humphrey. The only position they don't have an elite player at or a very good player at is edge rusher. And that's where you have Owe, who is in the good category along with Ronnie Stanley, they're just both too inconsistent. They're both too injury prone to actually rank inside, the very good or elite. Ronnie Stanley at one time was an elite player. Owe has the makings of being a very good pass rusher, but he's just been too inconsistent, too injury prone. So that's why I have him in the good. He has flashed a lot of upside though when he plays, and actually his efficiency is fairly good. Like it points in the right direction. Where the Ravens lose points for me is they have more question marks about their team than, let's say, the Bengals, right? Their offensive line is kind of suspect in certain areas. Voorhees and Falele at the guard positions, that's one of the weakest duos in football, if not the weakest guard duo in the entire NFL. Nelson Aguilar as a wide receiver 3 isn't the sexiest thing I've ever heard. Rosengarten is a rookie right tackle who's not a high draft pick. And Trenton Simpson is a replaceable linebacker. He's replacing Patrick Queen. So they go from a very good player there to a potential bum or weak player. And then, the rest, they've got vets like Pierce, Van Noy, Jackson, and then Bateman and Stevens are guys that have shown that they can play at a high level, but just, kind of a bit too inconsistent to be above an average starter at their position. So the Ravens, elite players. That's why people buy into them. Elite players, elite players, elite players. Very good coaching, but they also have more weaknesses, I feel, than they did entering last year. So they're a 91 at number 7. At number 6, the Green Bay Packers. The Packers score a 92, 1 point above the Ravens. They have a number of players that are above average here. They have 4 elite players: Xavier McKinney, Elton Jenkins, the guard, Kenny Clark, Jair Alexander, the cornerback. Now, I will say about the Packers, their elite quality of players, I don't think necessarily match other teams as well. Like, they're more lower end elite players, if you know what I mean. Like McKinney, Jenkins, Clark, Alexander. No one would really say any of those guys are top 5 at their position, maybe other than Alexander, but I gave it to them nonetheless. I will say that Jacobs and Gary have been borderline elite players in their history at their positions, while Jordan Love could definitely ascend to being an elite quarterback, and Zach Tom is still very young as well. Where I think they gain a lot of points is they have a lot of good players. All of their receivers, Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, and Reed, and maybe even Wicks, are above average starters at wide receiver. They all bring something different to the table as well. Devontae Wyatt is an ascending playmaker at defensive tackle. Quay Walker, same thing at linebacker. Preston Smith, a steady veteran in the good category. Where the Packers really benefit is they don't have really any players that are bad. McDuffie at linebacker and Keyshawn Nixon, who almost made the solid category, by the way. He's an amazing returner. He's just a bit of an inconsistent nickel player, but I kind of like him. He's feisty. But overall, like, the biggest thing that they don't have is like a second linebacker that's really good. Other than that, like, you could buy into Luke Musgrave at tight end. You could buy into guys like Walker at left tackle, Myers at center, given their draft history and their ability to develop offensive linemen. Eric Stokes is flashed as a former, I believe, was he a late first or early second round pick? Regardless, right? A majority of their weaker players are just younger guys that we don't really have a lot of information on and are growing and ascending. Even like Morgan and Bullard, who are rookies. So the Packers just benefit from not having a lot of weaknesses and a lot of above average players with a 92 grade. Entering the top 5 rosters in the NFL at number 5, The Cleveland Browns. Everyone knows the Browns are absolutely stacked, but they feature a horrific quarterback in Deshaun Watson. And honestly, it's that much more impressive that they still rank in the top 5, that these players are able to showcase their talent despite having this bad of a quarterback and having last year a man that was sitting on his couch, Joe Flacco, come out of retirement, put up numbies, and still showcase this talent of this roster and all the injuries they had. And they were still able to win 11 games. They were still able to make the playoffs. Shout out Kevin Stefanski, but this is a really well-built team. They only have 3 players, in my opinion, that are bad. One of them is their highly paid quarterback. One of them is their backup running back who is playing because Nick Chubb is injured. And the other is their third receiver who just has really become a bust. That's Elijah Moore. But otherwise, everyone else I respect, I think are good players. They have 4 elite players: Myles Garrett, Amari Cooper, Wyatt Teller, Joel Bitonio, Denzel Ward, Mitch. That actually is 5, not 4. Do math. David Njoku, Martin Emerson, Zadarius Smith, Ethan Pochich, and Jeremiah Owusu-Karamoa are 5 more very good players. And then in the good category, guess what? They have 5 more players. So they have 15 above average players. 15. 5 elites, 5 very goods, and 5 goods. Greg Newsome, Juan Thornhill, Grant Delpit, Dalvin Tomlinson, Jack Conklin. Now, the thing about the Browns is I feel like their offensive line has been kind of the marquee of their team, the most discussed unit of their team. It could take a step back this year. If Conklin is not quite himself coming off major injuries, Wills has never really been fantastic. He's also coming off an injury. And they lost their coach. So I wonder if that will add to regression. But their interior 3 is one of the best in football, if not the best in football. They have an awesome D-line where you could argue that all of their starters across the line, including a couple backups, are definitely startable players, if not elite, very good type of players. Garrett, Smith, Tomlinson. I like Shelby Harris. He's a solid starter. They've got good veterans added to the mix, like Jordan Hicks at linebacker, Jerry Jeudy at wide receiver, that just kind of give them a little bit extra boost at positions that maybe they needed it. I think that the Browns overall, defensively, there's very few holes. They have one of the best corner trios in football. They sneakily have a very good safety duo, if not a very good safety trio. The real weakness of their defense, when they're all healthy, is probably linebacker. And like I just said, Jeremiah Owusu-Karamoa is close to elite. And Jordan Hicks has been good for his whole career. So really, there is not a hole. That's why I think their defense is the best on paper in the NFL. It depends on if they play that way. Regression can always happen. Injuries can always happen. The offense is a little bit more suspect just at wide receiver in terms of the quality. Amari Cooper is getting older and he's their number 1, and they maybe wanted to trade for Brandon Ayuk and trade Amari Cooper, which is interesting enough. I love David Njoku. Nick Chubb not being there hurts. So their offense is more closer to average, but the defense really propels them. So I look at this overall roster, and if this team had a good quarterback, they would be an absolute terror for teams. So the Browns are at number 5. At number 4, the Detroit Lions. The Detroit Lions are at number 4. This is one of the best, youngest, awesome rosters in football, and it's one of my favorite rosters in the NFL. They only have 3 bad or weak players. That is Joseph at safety, I would categorize as a weaker starter. Khalif Raymond, clearly not the best third receiver in the league. And Marcus Davenport, who's just been injured, and they're expecting him to take a huge step up to be probably at least a starting rotation player for them at defensive end. He'll probably come off the field for Houston on those pass rushing snaps, but they need somebody to set the edge on early downs. So really, even their weaker players are kind of like role players in a way. One of their 3 safeties, one of their depth receivers, one of their rotation rushers. So really, it's not a huge thing for me. When I look at their roster, though, they're very impressive in terms of where they've improved. I think they've improved in the secondary. Terrion Arnold and Carlton Davis give them a major boost in the rankings. I think that their O-line and D-line overall show off strength. DJ Reader and McNeil and very good. Hutchinson is elite. And the biggest thing I see across the board is that all of the players like we were wondering about last year, could they take that step? Could they be really awesome? They're basically all really awesome. Sam Laporta is one of 3 tight ends that's elite. Kelsey, Kittle, and Laporta. St. Brown went from really good to great last year, right? Penei Sewell went from he's probably already a top 3 tackle to, yeah, he is, definitely, right? Aiden Hutchinson went from he put up a lot of pressures and he's a top 10 defensive end probably to like, yeah, he's definitely top 8, 7, 6 defensive end in the NFL, right? Frank Ragnow has always been one of, if not the best center in football. If it's not for Jason Kelsey, he's probably the best for the last 3 or 4 years, right? And then you look at Brian Branch, like a really promising rookie prospect that everybody liked coming out of Alabama. But how good is he? Well, apparently he's very, very good, right? Aleem McNeil went from good to very good. Decker has been good. Zeitler replaces Jonah Jackson. He has been good throughout his career. Jahmyr Gibbs, we knew he could flash high-end potential. He looked awesome as a rookie. Could he be elite this year? That's a question. Alex Anzalone, good linebacker, very underrated. Jared Goff, good quarterback that with the pieces around him is very good. Graham Glasgow is a good starting guard and has played well for this team. Amik Robertson is a nice little depth addition at the corner position, may start at nickel this year to allow Branch to play more safety. Jamison Williams has high-end potential at receiver. Could he enter a good number 2 receiver conversation? That's a question. So for me, the Lions just have very few holes, and they have a lot of young players that have ascended to a level of already giving us information about this player is awesome. So at number 4, a young, awesome team, the Lions. At number 3, the New York Jets, who have 1 more point in front of the Lions. Just barely edge out the Lions. And I think it's because of their elite players. So they have Breece Hall, Tyron Smith, Sauce Gardner, Quinnen Williams, Quincy Williams, and CJ Mosley. That is a lot of elite players. 6 elite players, which is more than the Lions. They have less very good players. They only have 3, DJ Reed, Michael Carter at nickel corner, and Garrett Wilson, who could be elite this year. And I would pretty much argue that he will be elite this year, but he has only been very good throughout his career so far. In the good category, which Rodgers and Goff are in the same category, both could argue that they could be better than that this year, but both do have still, their questions and concerns. So Rodgers isn't good. Morgan Moses was awesome last year for the Ravens, but he is very old. Elijah Vera Tucker gets hurt a lot, but he is good when he plays. The one that I like is Johnson. I think Jermaine Johnson could be awesome this season, like really take a huge step forward. He was already very good last year. And then Mike Williams. Mike Williams has shown flashes of elite, flashes of very good. His health puts him in the good category, but if he can show that he still has some movement ability, he can be put in very good. And then they don't have a ton of weaknesses, honestly. Not as many as I thought. They have concerns over depth in terms of wide receiver, in terms of maybe corner, in terms of maybe safety. But their overall biggest weaknesses are their depth of their receiving core and their safety position. Chuck Clark's coming back from an injury, hasn't really played for this team. Adams is kind of a no-name. Not a lot of people really know who he is, but he's okay. Will McDonald, I think, has a lot of talent. I'm excited for him. Javon Kinlaw, kind of the same thing. They did help their offensive line with Simpson. And Conklin is a serviceable tight end. Feels like a guy that you could replace and want more out of, but also at the same time, he provides a very nice floor at the position. So the Jets, the defense is fantastic. The secondary, the 3 corners really propel this ranking, as well as adding Tyron Smith, as well as, having Aaron Rodgers, as well as adding Mike Williams. They just overall got a lot better this offseason. People already thought they were very good last year in terms of their roster. Well, they got even better this offseason. If Hassan Reddick ends up playing, that might propel them a couple points higher than this. So yeah, the Jets have a legit championship level roster. It depends on their coaching. It depends on Aaron Rodgers, but they've got a level of roster that can compete with the best. At number 2, the Kansas City Chiefs. And the Chiefs just get over the Jets with a 98 over their 97. Now, the Chiefs have as many elite players as pretty much every team except for my number one team. The Chiefs have 6 elite players. That's Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, Chris Jones, Joe Tooney, Creed Humphrey, and Trent McDuffie. I think the only player there that people would even argue is not elite is Trent McDuffie, maybe. But other than that, I mean, it's like the best player at their positions. Like Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, Chris Jones, and Creed Humphrey might be the best player at their position in the NFL. So not only are those players elite, but they're like dog level elite. Like they're almost like 8s out of 7. You know what I mean? Then you've got very good players, Smith, Rice, Bolton, and Reed, which Rice I'm very high on. I think he's going to have a huge year, so I put him in very good. Maybe a little bit overzealous. Justin Reed, I'm also just a huge fan of personally. He's probably not looked at in this category quite as much, but I give him a little bit of a nudge up. So for them having those great players, I also kind of gave some respect to the lesser players, I guess, the guys that don't get the love. Isaiah Pacheco is in a great situation, but I do think he's a talented back. I think he's good. George Karlaftis, I think, is a little overrated, but I think he's a good player. He's definitely a grinder and every down, effort type of player, and he plays a ton. He's very good against the run, and he does, grind away. He had double-digit sacks last year. Marquise Brown, good is maybe a stretch for me. I put him in that category. He's definitely had good production, which is why I put him in that category, but his injuries, his consistency leave something to be desired. Drew Tranquil, very underrated. I think their only real weaknesses are their rookie left tackle, the kind of awkwardness of their receiving core, like Marquise Brown's health, Xavier Worthy being a rookie, the unknown there, Rashee Rice with the whole kind of offseason thing that he's had. So that's kind of awkward for me. But the left tackle, the receiving core, I feel like the defense definitely could regress in terms of its coverage, especially at corner where Johnson is expected to potentially get the start over maybe one of the W's. Williams, probably more so than Watson, but probably Williams. Their interior D-line and just their D-line overall is not my favorite. I'm not a huge fan of Derek Nandi. I don't think he's ever been fantastic. I also feel like Mike Dana is he's a solid D-end, but right, you've got George Karlaftis, Mike Dana. That's not the most fearsome pass rush duo in football, right? What really catapults this line and the front in big games is Chris Jones. That's really what it is. But, you also have to factor in, okay, Charles Omenihu's injured, so that's a good third defensive end. And Cook comes back from injury, so that's okay. Jawan Taylor, I'm not a huge fan of. He's very inconsistent, but at times he does showcase a pretty high upside. So the Chiefs, I was actually kind of genuinely shocked that they were this high on my list. Honestly, because when I think about their roster, I honestly, just filtering it through my vision of the team, I always stand by they're a better team than they are a roster. Like Andy Reid, Steve Spagnuolo, the elite players that they do have, Mahomes, Kelce, Chris Jones, they make the players around them better. They make the systems better. They win those games in the clutch moments because they're that good and because they're that well coached. But also, I was a little surprised by genuinely, how I feel about these kind of middle grouping players. And I think that's because I've just grown to respect a lot of them because they're winners, because they've won back-to-back championships. So that maybe gives them a little bit of a shine that other teams don't have the benefit of. But I have the Chiefs with a 98 in second place, and I think that's very respectable. Very respectable. Because the number one team on my roster rankings, it's not even close. It actually wasn't even close. I kind of thought this team would be number one, but I also wasn't 100% sure coming into this list. But it became very obvious, as soon as I finished their elite category. This is actually almost laughable, but the San Francisco 49ers are number one. And again, they have a 108 score. So they have an 108. That is 10 points better than the Kansas City Chiefs, the number 2 team in terms of roster talent. Now, the reason this is funny and I'm laughing is because the San Francisco 49ers have not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5, not 6, not 7, not 8, but 9 elite players, guys. And if you do the math, right, 9 times 7, if you do the math, that is actually higher, just their elite players, than the New York Giants, number 32, at 58, the Arizona Cardinals, number 31, at 61, and the LA Chargers at number 62, or at number 30 with a 62. So the 49ers, elite player category, that's only 9 of their players, grades higher than 3 teams on the list by itself. That's insane. Not only that, but they still have 5 players that are also above average. Brock Purdy, Lenore, Hufanga, who's back from injury, Leonard Floyd, who they added this offseason, Malik Collins, who they added this offseason. And you could argue Leonard Floyd might be very good, but Malik Collins is in the good. Hufanga, I think Lenore is really underrated. Lenore is an awesome player. I think he's a borderline elite nickel corner. And Hufanga was elite in the one healthy season he had. Brock Purdy, I think many defenders of his would also argue he's elite, but I'm not quite there. Now, they also have a number of solid players. Devondre Camp, this is the funny thing, right? They don't even have Dre Greenlaw on this. I took him out. Devondre Campbell is graded as a solid starter, which I think is fair. But Dre Greenlaw would probably be in the elite category, to be fair, if not very good at the least, right? So that actually hurt them on this list. But Campbell, Jawan Jennings, I think is probably a 2 on a lot of teams. He's a 3 for the 49ers. Yadam helps balance out their secondary at corner. Brendel at center, Banks at left guard aren't like amazing players, but they're serviceable, solid starters. And at safety, one of their up-and-coming younger defenders, Jair Brown, who had a really solid rookie season. Colton McKivitz is by far their weakest starting player at right tackle, and that's where they give up their most pressures on the right side of their line. Dominic Pooney is a rookie starting at right guard. Overall, as you can see, their weakest positions are their offensive line. Brendel at center, Banks at left guard, McKivitz at right tackle are solid or worse. And Trent Williams, the only elite, very good, or good offensive lineman on their team. Their secondary is also, a little bit lesser, with Yadam and Brown being only solid. But, this is nitpicking. This team is ridiculously talented. And for anybody thinking that they don't have a chance to win the Super Bowl this year, you are absolutely outrageous and out of your mind. You can do this exercise for yourself. This was extremely interesting, but the Niners come out on top for, I believe, the second year in a row, which goes to show how good their core is, how good they are at drafting, replacing talent, and they got a great roster. I love their players, too. They're entirely unique. McCaffrey, Debo, Boza, Warner. These players are household names, entirely unique players to their positions. Those are my roster rankings, ranking every single NFL roster from the worst to the best. It was a very long video. I thank you for watching. If you watch the whole darn thing, comment below and say Purdy Power. Thanks for watching. It's Mitch. Peace, guys.